A drug-fueled, bloodthirsty warlord has taken 11 peacekeeping soldiers captive. He was a paranoid schizophrenic, completely unhinged, and utterly mad. An elite unit of special forces is immediately mobilized. These men are bound together by their sheer ability to keep pushing forward, even when everything around them turns to hell. A daring and near-suicidal plan is drawn up. The odds were stacked completely against us. As execution threats grow, the special forces unleash their assault. They are outnumbered 5-1, heavily outgunned with artillery, and face an enemy obsessed with black magic. Now on Black Ops, step inside a mission so perilous, it was given the name Operation Sudden Death. August 2000. Sierra Leone, a small, shattered nation on the coast of West Africa. For nearly a decade, loose alliances of savage rebel gangs have fought tooth and nail for control of the land. Their leaders driven by nothing but greed and the promise of unimaginable wealth. This was the very heart of the illegal blood diamond trade. Blood diamonds became a critical factor in fueling the violence that consumed the nation. Every day, defenseless villages were raided without mercy. The rebels often seized children, forcing them to become soldiers against their will. Those left behind were mutilated, punished by brutal amputation. They hacked off arms, calling it short sleeve when cut above the elbow, and long sleeve when cut below. The purpose was to spread terror across the land, to prove their power through cruelty. Among the most brutal of these rebel factions was a mob of nearly 1,000 fighters known as the West Side Boys. The West Side Boys thrived on drugs and alcohol. That was the fuel that kept their war machine alive. They abducted local women, and their entire existence revolved around sex, violence, and narcotics. Their behavior was erratic, dangerous, and unpredictable. If that wasn't terrifying enough, they were convinced that voodoo made them bulletproof. One man who knew their world all too well was Black Zorro, a 26-year-old who had spent almost 2 years with the West Side Boys. Recruited at just 14, he rose through the ranks to become a trusted junior officer. We smoked endless amounts of marijuana. For drink, there was a crude, potent alcohol we called hard wine. Cocaine showed up at times, but heroin was everywhere. In the jungle, everyone was high on heroin. I stayed high all day. The drugs made me feel invincible, like nothing could stop me. The moment I used them, I felt ready for battle, ready for any fight. To prevent Sierra Leone from collapsing entirely, the global coalition stepped in with military force. British troops in particular played a central role, not only in keeping fragile peace but also in training the local army to defend itself. It was a demonstration of Western commitment to preserving what was then a fragile democracy in one of the poorest corners of Africa. The intervention carried enormous symbolic value. On a seemingly ordinary Friday afternoon, 11 military training advisors from Britain's Royal Irish Regiment departed on a routine patrol. At a crossroads, their commander, Major Alan Marshall, made a fateful choice. He turned down a dirt road that cut deep into the jungle. He was unknowingly leading his men straight into the stronghold of the West Side Boys. I cannot understand why they left the main road and entered our domain. It was forbidden territory. No one entered but us. Unofficially, some believed he was on a mission to quietly assess the rebels, to measure their strength, numbers, and weaponry, to see what kind of force they would be in a future confrontation. But the British had no idea they were already under watch. Scouts from the West Side Boys were hidden in the jungle, tracking every move. We saw them as an immense threat. They came into our camp without permission. We didn't know their intentions. We thought they came to spy on us. Letting them leave was not an option. They reached the riverside, where one flank of the rebel base stretched. The moment they arrived, gunfire erupted. They were instantly surrounded by a frenzied, screaming mob of West Side Boys. Hopelessly outnumbered and with no escape route, the soldiers had no choice but to surrender. It was obvious right away that this was no friendly encounter. The disciplined, highly trained troops were now prisoners of a savage mob of drugged-up jungle fighters. We captured the soldiers to draw international attention. We were tired of hiding in the jungle, and we believed they could be used as leverage to get what we wanted. The 11 British troops were beaten, stripped of their possessions, and dragged into a filthy jungle hut. At the Ministry of Defense in London, word of the captured soldiers quickly reached the chief of the British Armed Forces. At first, we weren't certain just how severe this was. I knew of the West Side Boys. I had visited Sierra Leone and been briefed about them, but I didn't yet know what they might do. General Guthrie and Defense Secretary Hoon called a crisis meeting in the Situation Room deep beneath London. The urgent question was, how could we save the kidnapped soldiers who were in grave danger of torture, death, or being scattered across Sierra Leone? Every passing hour added pressure. The reality was bleak. We had no intelligence, no eyes on the rebel camp, no idea of their numbers or their weapons. Worst of all, there was no way of knowing whether the hostages would survive a rescue attempt. The British could not escape the haunting memory of a disastrous operation 7 years earlier, the infamous Black Hawk Down incident. 18 American soldiers were killed when helicopters were shot down by rockets in Somalia. Their bodies were dragged through Mogadishu's streets in front of the world's cameras. Of course, reports of the crisis were going to the Prime Minister. He asked me directly, "Is this dangerous?" I said, "Yes, extremely." Then he asked, "Are lives likely to be lost?" I answered, "Almost certainly." Fearing the political and human cost of a failed mission, the British government decided to begin negotiations. I was fine with starting negotiations, but in the background, we always prepared to use force if it came to that. If talks failed, the only option left would be a military rescue. 3 days into the crisis, a team of expert negotiators from Scotland Yard flew into Africa. Their mission, to secure the soldiers' release peacefully. Leading the rebel side was their commander, a 24-year-old warlord who called himself Brigadier General Fode Calais. Calais was a paranoid schizophrenic, plagued by delusions. Fode Calais was the strongest commander we had. He was skilled in combat and always led his men from the front. But he was also so delusional that he believed his ragtag militia could drive the British entirely out of Sierra Leone. Everyone knew that once Calais gave an order, it was law. He took full responsibility for his men's actions. At his first meeting with negotiators, Calais unleashed a rambling stream of demands. Some were simple, like amnesty for the West Side Boys. Others were outrageous, like demanding that all British forces leave the country. Most absurd of all, he wanted to be named President of Sierra Leone. In some cases, it becomes clear from the start that the likelihood of a peaceful solution, with hostages unharmed, is extremely low. That can be due to the group's history, the nature of their demands, or their twisted ideology. A number of factors can make negotiation hopeless. Judgment could mean life or death. The negotiators are walking a razor's edge. Calais' outrageous demands will never be accepted, yet the team must somehow convince him that they could be. The hope is simple. If he keeps talking, the hostages may continue to breathe. Clearly, the rebels had not wanted to kill the captives immediately. They saw value in keeping them alive, and that decision bought time. That was the single piece of good news. The bad news, however, was the unpredictability, the volatility of the situation. In the blink of an eye, conditions could swing from relative stability, where hostages were well treated, to sudden murder. To confirm the well-being of the prisoners, negotiators pushed to meet Major Marshall, the patrol leader, face to face. Calais accepted. It would be a decision he would come to regret. Major Marshall, the officer in command of the captured British patrol, saw in these meetings a chance to secretly pass on vital intelligence to his own side. The abducted men were trained soldiers. They understood the direction events were heading. During the rebels' proud tours of their base, showing off anti-aircraft guns, mortars, and their weaponry, Marshall had quietly observed and memorized everything. Back in the room where the prisoners were locked, he carefully drew a detailed map of the rebel stronghold, marking positions and strengths. He then rolled the paper tightly and concealed it inside a pen cap. When Marshall finally shook hands with one of the Scotland Yard negotiators, he made the covert exchange. If Calais spotted the maneuver, it would end in catastrophe. But incredibly, the negotiator slipped the object into his pocket without being detected. It was an error on the rebels' part. These were not masterful hostage-takers. Allowing such a handshake enabled an intelligence handover, an unwise move indeed. This breakthrough was unexpected but critical. At last, the British had the information needed to plan a rescue. And only one force in Britain had the skills required to attempt it: the Special Air Service, the SAS. Pioneers of black operations since the Second World War, their reputation was legendary. The SAS, Britain's elite special operations unit, became the model upon which many other forces around the world were built. They set the standard. Over the decades, they had adapted and refined their craft, taking part in nearly every major British conflict. From the streets of Northern Ireland, to the freezing Falklands, to the burning deserts of Iraq, the SAS were famed for fighting anywhere, under any condition, and always with secrecy. The regiment is small, just a few hundred men, the absolute elite. To join, candidates endure a grueling selection process so harsh that most fail. Those who succeed earn the privilege of wearing the SAS wings and dagger badge on their beret. For many, it is the purest form of soldiering imaginable. As one member put it, joining the SAS was the ultimate expression of being a soldier. The SAS are known for two specialties. One is storming fortified targets. In 1980, they demonstrated this on the world stage, rescuing 19 hostages during the Iranian embassy siege in London. It was a moment that defined modern counterterrorism. They perfected methods like fast roping from helicopters, blasting through doors, tossing stun grenades, and eliminating threats with lightning speed, leaving civilians unharmed. It was a skill where mistakes could not be tolerated, because lives hung in the balance. Unlike American units equipped with the most advanced technology, the SAS often relied on sheer skill. As their men say, what they lack in gear, they make up for in ability. Their second great expertise is jungle warfare. Many see jungle fighting as the purest, most unforgiving form of combat. In dense, closed terrain, there are no wide-open fields. Everything is on top of you. You must adapt completely to the environment, living and fighting as part of it. Now, using the map Marshall had smuggled out, the SAS prepared to combine both skills, hostage rescue and jungle operations, into one daring mission. By this point, the standoff had dragged on for nearly a week. Negotiators kept pressing for a peaceful solution. Calais shifted his demands. Now he asked for medicine for his men and a satellite phone so he could call the BBC and air his grievances to the world. The British agreed, if he released some hostages in exchange. It was a major success. 5 prisoners were freed in return for medicine and a satellite phone. This was a victory on several fronts: open communication with the rebels, medical supplies that could serve either side, and new intelligence opportunities. But there was more. The British could now trace the signal of the satellite phone to pinpoint Calais' exact location. Unknown to the rebels, a task force had already landed in Sierra Leone. They were preparing in secret for a rescue. About 300 troops were deployed. Most were paratroopers from Britain's airborne regiment, the Paras, but their role was mainly to support. The spearhead of the operation would be 50 men of the SAS, reinforced by 20 from the Royal Navy's Special Boat Service, the SBS. The mission was given an unremarkable name to avoid suspicion: Operation Barras. Unlike the dramatic titles often used by the United States, Britain's naming system was simple. A computer generated random words, and if appropriate, they were used. It was a typically understated British approach. With the quiet approval of the Sierra Leone government, Operation Barras established a secret base near the capital. Once inside the country, the reality set in. Kit was packed. Intelligence boards went up. Briefings intensified. The men knew it was going to happen. They needed to be ready. The SAS began collecting every detail they could about the rebel camp. Their preferred plan was bold. At night, a small team in SBS boats would slip upriver in total silence, sneak into the camp, break into the hostage hut, and escape before a shot was fired. As they waited for approval, rehearsals began. A mock-up of the village was built so soldiers could practice distances, arcs of fire, and movements. In the chaos of battle, confusion could be fatal. Training ensured precision, but authorization for the mission had not yet been granted. The final decision rested with Defense Secretary Jeff Hoon in London. The lives of the 6 remaining British captives now hung by a thread. If negotiation failed, a battle of unprecedented intensity would erupt to win their freedom. The British troops were arrogant. We would issue commands, yet they would refuse outright, saying they would not accept our authority. They were incredibly stubborn. Many times we would try to speak to them, lay out what needed to be done, but they would simply disregard us. They really did not make things easier for themselves. At times, Calais would have to get physical to drive the point home. He would grab them, strike them, shake them hard to remind them that he was the one in control. The only way he could assert his dominance was through force, leaving no doubt about who was in charge. The most important thing was always reading the atmosphere, gauging the mood, determining whether the situation was leaning towards calm cooperation or towards hostility, whether their response was going to be rational and composed, or if things were spiraling into something that could never be resolved peacefully. Defense Secretary Jeff Hoon had not yet sanctioned a full rescue mission, but he had secretly approved an extremely dangerous operation. A small 4-man SAS surveillance team slipped silently into the jungle. Their assignment was to gather precise intelligence on the rebel base. The first step was to position themselves around the village. That meant enduring days in the swamps, crawling through some of the most revolting and unbearable conditions imaginable. Moving silently, advancing just inches at a time, they crept closer to enemy territory, searching for a hidden position from which they could see everything without ever being seen. Their mission was to establish an observation post, or OP. An OP is essentially a grave dug into the earth of the jungle. These men knew how to vanish into the terrain, slipping into the thick jungle unnoticed, disappearing under a tarp for weeks, fixed on a single target, without anyone ever realizing they were there. That was their craft. You dig a pit, climb inside, conceal it with branches and leaves, and remain there for as long as needed, keeping watch on the enemy base until the mission is launched, or until orders come to withdraw. This type of surveillance is an SAS hallmark. It requires unshakable patience, discipline, and precision. The men had to eat, rest, and stay focused for days straight, barely moving at all. Within the special operations world, there is a saying, they are the quiet professionals. And in the field, that is exactly what they are. But immediately they uncovered 3 major setbacks. First, the hostages were no longer at the main rebel base where they had initially been held. They had been moved across a wide river to a smaller, more isolated camp deep in the jungle. Second, the planned river assault became impossible. The waters were riddled with hidden sandbanks, making it useless for special forces boats. And third, the jungle itself was too dense, making a land approach out of the question. That left only one option: a direct helicopter assault. If they could have crept in, captured the rebels without firing a shot, it would have been the ideal outcome. But that was no longer possible. There was no way to reach them quietly. The only path left was to storm the camp and strike hard. The only aircraft suited for this mission was one of the largest helicopters in the world, the twin-rotor HC-2 Chinook. But mounting an air assault with a Chinook brought its own risks. Helicopters are notoriously loud, and the moment one approaches, the element of surprise is gone. While a Chinook can carry immense loads, it is also slow, cumbersome, and easy to target. That is why it earned the nickname, the flying school bus. If a Chinook were hit and brought down, loaded with SAS operators, the consequences would be catastrophic. To make matters even worse, most of the West Side boys remained entrenched in their main base on the opposite side of the river. They were armed with heavy weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, heavy machine guns, and mortars, any of which could shoot down a helicopter or rain, devastating fire on the hostage camp. Any rescue attempt risked turning instantly into a death trap. The SAS leadership had to rethink their entire plan, but time was slipping away. Rebel commander Fodali Calais was growing increasingly erratic and impatient with the drawn-out negotiations. At any moment, the situation could swing violently. The group was unpredictable, volatile, and had already committed killings in the past. Even if they were cooperative today, there was no guarantee the hostages would be alive tomorrow. Scotland Yard negotiators contacted Calais daily via his satellite phone, but each call revealed him to be more unstable. He spent his days consumed by drugs and alcohol. By midday, he was already staggering drunk. Eventually, the lack of electricity in his camp drained the phone battery, cutting off all communication. The message was clear. Negotiations had collapsed. The hostages' lives were now in grave danger. One evening, Calais summoned everyone and announced, We are going to execute one of them." He seized Major Marshall, the British commander, dragged him to the jungle's edge, forced him to kneel, pressed a rifle to his head, and pulled the trigger. The gun clicked empty. This time it was a mock execution. Next time, the weapon could be loaded. When this disturbing news reached London, Jeff Hoon concluded that diplomacy was over. Reports detailed exactly what was happening inside the huts where the soldiers were imprisoned. One crucial piece of intelligence revealed that the men were subjected to mock executions, with weapons aimed at them and even fired near them. Such cruelty was beyond tolerable. It was completely unacceptable. The order was given. Operation Barras was officially underway. The SAS were unquestionably the right choice for the mission. They were specialists in hostage rescue, trained in unconventional warfare, and had successfully executed similar operations elsewhere. Still, everyone knew the odds were dire. The mission was so dangerous that the soldiers gave it their own name, Operation Certain Death. If they managed to even reach the camp without being shot out of the sky, they would still face overwhelming numbers. The rebels outnumbered them more than 5-1, and they believed their black magic made them bulletproof, making them reckless and fearless in battle. In combat, they did not stop to see who had fallen. When they opened fire, bullets flew indiscriminately, leaving nothing alive in their path. The men of Operation Barras gathered before dawn, ready to launch a daring assault on a fortified jungle stronghold. The mission was personally overseen by General Charles Guthrie, once commander of the SAS and now head of Britain's armed forces. They had a solid plan, but it was a plan built on risk. In operations like these, you could never predict how the enemy would respond. Guthrie makes it absolutely clear to his political superiors that the mission to free 6 British hostages is almost certain to bring about heavy casualties. General Guthrie stated bluntly that this operation carried serious risks, and that he could not promise there would be no soldiers lost in the attempt. In an effort to counter the overwhelming odds stacked against the rescue, Guthrie approves a bold new strategy: 2 coordinated strikes launched at the same time. First, around 50 elite SAS soldiers will move toward the small jungle encampment on the northern riverbank, known as Giberi Bana. This is where the captives are being held under the watch of rebel commander Fode Kali. To take the rebels by complete surprise, the SAS will descend on ropes from hovering helicopters, landing only a few feet away from the hut that confines the prisoners. We had no certainty about what to expect, so the instant we knew where the hostages were, that was the exact moment we had to strike. If the captives were moved elsewhere, it would be jungle after jungle after jungle, with almost no chance of finding them again. At the very same time, a second assault would begin. A force of 150 paratroopers, who had been waiting in reserve, would storm the main rebel base on the southern bank at Magbeni. They would arrive by helicopter, launching an assault designed to divert the rebels' attention, overwhelm their strength, and knock out their heavy weaponry. The mission was scheduled for dawn on September 8th, the 15th day of the crisis. But at the final moment, complications arose. The SAS reconnaissance team hidden deep in the jungle sent an urgent message. The operation had originally been set for first light on Saturday morning. But the soldiers, who had been crawling inch by inch through swamps to reach the huts in the outskirts of the village, needed far more time than expected. The plan demanded that this observation unit crawl to within a few yards of the hostage hut to provide cover fire, but they had to move only at night and at a painfully slow pace to avoid discovery. They requested the assault be pushed back by 24 hours. Because of the delay in reaching position, the mission was postponed until Sunday morning. The night before the attack, the rebels were in a state of chaos. Everyone was intoxicated. They had been partying heavily, and many of them were consuming drugs deep into the night. Because the rain fell heavily outside, they had no warning of the storm about to descend upon them. One day later, Operation Certain Death finally took flight. The helicopters first headed out to sea, then mustered off the coast. Nearly every man left behind a final letter with a trusted comrade to be delivered to his loved ones should he never return. At the Ministry of Defense in London, Jeff Hoon could do nothing but wait and hope for the best. He later recalled that there was no live television broadcast of the battle. What he knew was only that the operation had begun, and that it would proceed exactly as it had been briefed to him beforehand. 2 Chinook helicopters carried the 50-man SAS team, with a third carrying the first wave of paratrooper reinforcements. Each SAS operator carried over 80 pounds of equipment, body armor, an M14 assault rifle, and enough grenades and ammunition to sustain hours of combat. By that stage, every man knew his task inside and out. Each knew where his comrade was supposed to move when the helicopter ramp dropped, and what he would do if the situation unfolded differently. The plan was burned into their minds, and now, all they awaited was the ramp lowering to unleash them into battle. During operations, adrenaline takes over. Everyone becomes driven and determined. The sense of unity and cooperation becomes almost indescribable, forged by the extreme danger. Well-trained soldiers simply carry out what they have been trained to do. After only a 10-minute flight, the 6 helicopters made their final approach to target. The 4-man reconnaissance team relayed to the pilots, "You can come in. The coast is clear. There's no movement. Visibility is good." Using the river as a guide, the assault force flew low, masked from sight by the jungle walls on both sides. Even more crucially, the dense trees muffled the rotor noise. To the rebels, the helicopters were invisible and silent. At 6:30 in the morning, the deafening roar above jolted the rebels from their stupor. One rebel later recalled stepping out of his hut and suddenly hearing a strange, unnatural noise. Looking up, he saw a massive helicopter descending. Soldiers began sliding down ropes to the ground as the wind whipped violently from the rotors. Fear consumed him. The most critical target was the hostage hut. The entire operation depended on reaching the captives before the rebels could execute them. At last, the reconnaissance soldiers, who had been lying still for nearly a week, opened fire, killing the guards at the hut just in time. The SAS stormed in, shouting, "British soldiers! British soldiers!" The captives immediately knew that the rescue force they had long prayed for had arrived. Meanwhile, across the river at the rebel stronghold of Magbeni, the paratroopers prepared to engage. Their task was to prevent the bulk of the West Side boys from interfering with the rescue. But, as in most operations, unexpected complications quickly arose. When the first paratrooper jumped from the hovering Chinook, he landed waist-deep in swamp water, weighed down by his pack and weapons. Many others struggled as they sank into the mud, causing chaos and slowing the assault. And then disaster struck. As they neared the edge of the base, a mortar round detonated in the trees directly above the command unit of the paratrooper force. The explosion burst overhead like an air blast, instantly wounding nearly the entire command staff. They had to be evacuated immediately. The only member of the 8-man command team not seriously wounded was a young officer, Captain Danny Matthews. For the first time, he suddenly found himself commanding a major battle. Quickly regathering his men, he ordered them to eliminate the most immediate danger, the mortar crew. By now, on the northern side of the river, the rebels at Gabaribana had regrouped and were returning heavy fire. The SAS realized the battle was not unfolding according to plan. As soon as they landed, they had been ambushed from an unexpected direction, forcing them to fight through different positions than originally intended. One interpreter recalled leading his group to the edge of the forest, seeking cover behind huts as the firefight escalated violently. The West Side boys, heavily armed, fought back ferociously once they realized the scale of the attack. Yet the SAS, through training and discipline, managed to hold them at bay long enough to escort the hostages to the helicopter extraction zone. But danger still loomed. Soldiers knew that it would be a tragedy to survive the firefight through the village, free the prisoners, and then be gunned down while boarding helicopters on the way out. Just as success seemed certain, one SAS soldier was struck by a burst of gunfire. It was Sergeant Brad Tinian, a highly respected legend within the regiment. He was mortally wounded. Across the river, paratroopers were dealing with numerous casualties from the mortar strike. On the other side, the SAS were now carrying one of their dying men. Though the hostages had been freed, the operation was still balanced on a knife edge. The outcome of Operation Certain Death now hung in the balance. Yet through it all, these soldiers showed their unmatched ability to keep pressing forward, even when the fight descended into pure hell. Although the rebels lacked the ability to bring down the British helicopters, they still managed to cause significant damage to the 2 units struggling their way through the thick jungle. The odds were stacked completely against us. We had flown straight into their stronghold, right into the heart of their village, their own backyard, using two of the largest helicopters in existence. By all logic, if they had been fully alert and prepared, they could have destroyed those helicopters instantly, blasting them out of the sky. We would have been fortunate if even a single man had survived to get inside. One of our men, Trooper Brad Tinian, was gravely injured. Immense efforts were made, I know for certain, in order to save his life. A helicopter pilot managed to pick him up and transport him out to a naval vessel we had stationed just off the coast of Sierra Leone. Tragically, he passed away before he could receive further medical care. By this stage, all 6 hostages had also been extracted and flown safely to the waiting ship. Meanwhile, in London, General Guthrie, himself once a member of the Special Forces, received a coded message from the battlefield just moments before he appeared live on breakfast television. We decided to strike the location where the hostages were being held at 6:30 this morning. The situation remains extremely chaotic. Fighting is still underway, but the first reports indicate that the hostages are alive. I do not yet know their exact condition, but what matters most is that they are safe. The hostages may have been rescued, yet the battle itself was far from concluded. The men who joined the fighting were all killed. Most of them had been living with me in the same hut. I lost nearly all of my closest friends. The next major objective for the SAS was the capture of the rebel commander, Fode Calais. One of the 4-man fire teams was tasked with assaulting his residence. They stormed the building, bursting through the doors and clearing room after room. In one chamber, they found only a simple wooden bed with a thin mattress. Convinced it was empty, they were about to move on when one soldier, thinking carefully, decided to check beneath it. There, trembling in silence, unable to move or speak, was the leader of the West Side Boys himself, Fode Calais, the same man who had demanded to be declared president of Sierra Leone. With their commander captured alive, the rest of the West Side Boys quickly vanished into the dense forest. We no longer had any support left, so resistance in our section of the village was impossible. All I could hear was the thunder of British heavy weapons. I knew the only option left was to flee as fast as possible. Black Zorro, along with several other fighters, fled deep into the jungle, running as far away from the battlefield as their legs could carry them. The British forces now stood alone in control of the ground. Today, Black Zorro makes his way back to the village of Gbaribana, the place where the hostages had been held, and the place he had called home for nearly a year and a half while serving as a West Side Boy fighter. This visit marks the first time he has returned since the clash with the British 12 years earlier. This was the spot where Calais lived, the commander in charge here. The house was destroyed, riddled with bullet holes, heavy damage everywhere, because the helicopters descended right here, pounding the area with fire to kill Calais. This was the hut I stayed in. Here was my room, the place I slept. They wiped most of it out, but once, long ago, I carved my name here, Black Zorro. In the early hours of the morning, I woke up in my room. Immediately I came outside. I was standing here, relieving myself when I heard the noise coming from over there. Suddenly, I saw helicopters overhead, soldiers rappelling down. I rushed into the house and tried to wake my comrades. I grabbed my AK-47 and stood ready. Gunfire erupted everywhere, so we attempted to resist, firing back, but it was already too late. The incoming firepower was overwhelming. The British soldiers were swarming from every direction. I had no choice but to retreat into the bush. As I ran, I blazed a path with my weapon, spraying the trees with about 30 rounds to force open a way out. I forced myself through the undergrowth, still hearing heavy fire behind me. The British were all around us, and the ambush was deadly. Somehow, I survived and escaped, only by the will and power of God. All of the hostages from the Royal Irish Regiment eventually made complete recoveries. Many of them continue to serve in the British Army even to this day. Rebel leader Fode Calais was later put on trial in Freetown, where he received a sentence of 50 years imprisonment. The remaining West Side Boys who survived the clash entered a reconciliation program and returned to ordinary civilian life. Today, Black Zorro is homeless, living on the streets of Freetown, Sierra Leone's capital city. The West Side Boys disbanded. Everyone scattered their own way. Those who managed to survive had to keep struggling to live, and those who were captured had to face long years in prison. That was the end of our group. We were finished. Operation Barras left a powerful mark on Sierra Leone. In the following months, rebel forces across the country began surrendering and laying down their weapons. It sent an unmistakable message to every rebel group. If you continue your violence, we will pursue you relentlessly. We will track you down wherever you hide, even deep in the jungle, and strike you with overwhelming force. Your time will be over. Modern Sierra Leone remains impoverished, but it is no longer torn by war. That single mission brought about a decisive close to years of brutal conflict, achieved through the unmatched skill and extraordinary bravery of the SAS.